Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Fly Culture Podcast. I'm going to start this one by saying, again, I always seem to say thank you, but I'm really thrilled and excited to be able to tell you that we've sold out of issues 1, 7 and 8 now. And we've got very, very limited copies of the remaining ones. So if you're a collector, somewhere down the line, these might even become collectible issues, who knows, but they seem to be going really, really well with people. Also with the podcast, I've been putting it quietly onto YouTube now as well. So if you want to watch the podcasts, you can do that. And I believe, if I was talking to somebody who's much smarter than me, that if you have the YouTube app, you can also listen to them as well. So it might be another way of accessing the podcast. But on to today's guest. And I'm really pleased to be joined by Stuart McTeare today. If you don't know him already, he's first and foremost a fly angler. He's a river keeper for the Piscatorials, and he's also run a fishing lodge on Loch Sheelin in the past. So he's got a really impressive fishing CV, and there's lots I want to speak to him about, from conservation to fishing to fly tying and everything else. So I'm really excited to have him here today. Stuart, it's really great to have you here, and thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
A great pleasure and a great honour to be invited. So thank you.
Well, I was thinking about the last time we met up, and our good friend, mutual friend Luke introduced us, and you very kindly came up to our launch party at Farlow's. And it was great to meet you there and to talk to you about fishing and your life in fishing at the time. And it's made perfect sense to talk to you today about these things. But I guess since we last met up, quite a lot's happened, and it's a different sort of fishing environment at the moment, obviously, given everything. How's the year been for you?
Gosh, well, it's essentially work-wise, as you say. I work on the river. I'm head keeper with the Piscatorial Society, and yeah, it's been a challenging year. I have worked. I don't know whether I should declare it, but barring sort of 2 weeks at the very start of lockdown, where we were asked not to drive our works vehicles, I worked right the way through lockdown. And then obviously we started on the 13th of May, which is, ordinarily we start on the rivers here on the 15th of April. So we didn't lose a hell of a lot of fishing. Ordinarily those early weeks are pretty quiet anyway. So we started on the 13th of May. I think, as everybody knows, we had a glorious spring. And we were just at the very start of the mayfly here, certainly on the Avon where I'm based. And we had various restrictions in place, car parking restrictions. So we have seen, in fact, we're just about to get our returns in, our annual returns. So we'll see in that exactly what the footfall was. But I think we have had a little, maybe on the Avon, we've had a little, we've had a few less people fishing on I think, but down to the car parking restrictions. But I think elsewhere it may have been said that we had more people fishing this year on our waters. So we'll see. We're about to find that one out. But it's been an odd year. We've had more trespass this year, more boating, more wild swimming. Bless them, really, swimming in all that contaminated water. I wouldn't fancy it, but hey ho. And yeah, very challenging. And it's been interesting in that people have more swimming, more boating, more poaching, if you like, as well. But it seems that the people that are indulging in all those things have been sort of almost hyper aggressive and very confrontational. So, which has been a challenge not to get involved with that, really. But
How do you deal with that then? If you come across somebody poaching, I assume what happens is that they feign ignorance, didn't know they couldn't fish there, but they obviously guess that nobody's fishing, so they can go help themselves.
Absolutely. I have to say my go-to opening gambit with guys that are quite clearly not members of the club is, hello, how are you doing? Have you caught anything? Because I am genuinely interested whether they're using bread or spinning or floats or whatever. I am genuinely interested, whether they've caught anything. And generally, they probably say no, they haven't, even if they've stashed them sort of in the undergrowth. Another interesting aspect is almost everybody, without exception, even young kids, say, "Well, we're putting them back." So we're catch and releasing, which is good. Whether they actually are, I don't know, but I'm interested in people fishing, and certainly with young kids. I mean, I spent my my younger youth roaming the ponds of North London, trying to catch whatever I could catch, and sometimes there may have been a little bit of trespass involved there. But essentially, with kids fishing, I think we should be, whether we're encouraging that, and we do have areas on our society water where if it's adjacent to a public footbridge, then we do turn a blind eye to kids fishing. Generally speaking, older people that are, they just go. They'll just go. Very rarely are they confrontational. We will have one character who writes for or has written for the Angler's Mail, and fishes one of our waters. He guests, if you like, and he has post various films of himself catching our trout that are there on social media.
Really,
he's a bit cheeky. He's got various angling sponsorship deals as well, so that's a challenge. But he claims that he doesn't appreciate that it's private water. But yeah, so by and large, there's not. In fact, by and large, interestingly, there's not a lot of confrontation with guys that are fishing, guesting, as we call it now, as opposed to poaching. Occasionally, you do get someone that's that's a bit aggressive, but we just back off. And in fact, within Wiltshire, and I think the same over on the Testonich, we have keepers group WhatsApp groups now, and the police are involved with those WhatsApp groups. So if you do get someone that is being a bit aggressive, you can contact the WhatsApp group, and you will get police backup. But that's rare enough, really. Generally speaking, you can deal with those problems, and people will go eventually. But it's been, I think the swimmers really and the boaters have been more militant than the anglers, or the guesters, shall we say. But
that's interesting. Do you think that is not understanding, and they're people possibly not from the local area? Because I've recorded a podcast recently, and we were talking about Dartmoor and how people were flocking to Dartmoor, yet leaving all their rubbish there.
Yeah.
Do you think some of this is a genuine, although militant, misunderstanding of the situation, that there's a river there so they can go in it? Do you think there's an element of that as well? And people want to go out, it's been a difficult time, they want to go out and get some fresh air and stuff. Do you think there is an element of that, or it is just downright, right, well, I'm going to try it on?
I think there's a whole mixture of stuff going on, really. I think there are people that genuinely are, I say ignorant, ill-informed. They don't appreciate that the rivers are privately owned. Yeah, and then there are people that definitely are. Yeah, we're going out there. We're going to boat, and you can't do anything about about it because we're in the river and you're on the bank. In fact, we had one quite hilarious occasion with Luke a few years ago, where that was the case. There were some guys in the river. What they didn't appreciate was we all had our chest waders on. So actually, yes, we could get in the river and hook up their boats and say, yeah,
they're being impounded. Yeah,
kind of. Which you don't. In fact, you don't really want to get involved with, to be honest, confrontation. But I think a lot of certainly the boaters don't appreciate. I wouldn't. They are kind of fragile ecosystems, and we have a lot of migratory birds. We have nesting waterfowl, and certainly this year, during lockdown, that main period of lockdown, was right during the nesting season, and I don't think people fully appreciate what potential damage they're doing. And we have some issues with groups of or largest groups of juvenile swans, which have can graze out vast areas of ranunculus water crowfoot, which is very important to the ecosystem, and is a designated protected species. And obviously boats and boaters can push these groups of swans around. Ordinarily, if you've got a nesting pair of swans with cygnets, then they will hold their ground. But as soon as you get boaters come down the river, they then mix up these groups and sort of upset the balance, if you like. So there are subtle things like that going on.
And I guess people who would do that wouldn't understand that or have any inkling of that. And that's, as fly anglers, we are more attuned to the whole balance of nature on the riverbank, aren't we? And in it as well.
No, absolutely. No, and it is very, very subtle, and they might not see it that's what's happening. But that does happen, certainly, which obviously isn't great. But there we are.
I'd like to say, as the club, the Piscatorial Club, I think that's a really nice, enlightened policy about the youngsters fishing by bridges and stuff like that. I think that's really cool, and that's a sort of a nod to older, more simpler times as well, isn't it? And just letting the kids enjoy the resource, and in some ways it may inspire them to continue their love of fishing.
Absolutely. And historically on the Wiley, there's a particular hatch pool over there where we used to give the local kids a ticket to fish, and they could go to the local post office in the spring and claim their ticket. Their sort of, I wouldn't say it was a golden Willy Wonka-ish ticket, but they could claim a ticket to fish in this particular hatch pool. Interestingly, this year, that same hatch pool, you wouldn't have wanted to fish there because we had real issues with swimming, with wild swimming, and good numbers of people there picnicking and swimming. So you couldn't have fished. But that has been, interestingly, over the last however many years, a bit of a theme. More and more people coming and swimming in these rivers. Certainly the areas that are adjacent to public footpaths, and whilst we, you don't want to be seen as sort of elitist toffs that only that want to keep the river to themselves, but there are issues with swimming, and I may have touched on it earlier, joking aside, we have pollution issues, we have Viles disease. There's now talk of, in fact, I think it was on the news last night or the night before, they're actually sampling at the sewage outfalls for traces of COVID. So yeah, I'm not sure that I'd particularly want to be swimming. And there have been there have been people that have drowned in rivers over the years. So I think I think people just need to be mindful and respectful, really,
Yeah,
of
yeah, absolutely.
of all users. And if there are public footpaths adjacent to the rivers, then yeah, people should be allowed access, definitely.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting with that if people, the wider public, and I've podcasted with Fergal Sharkey, and he's talked about the damage pollution is doing to rivers, and it may be that with this wild swimming, people suddenly start realizing actually these aren't safe to swim in, and it may, in a roundabout way, engage the wider public in these issues as well, mightn't it?
I think so, very much so, and certainly the coverage in the newspapers. There's been some good coverage in the newspapers over the last short while during lockdown, talking about wild swimming and talking about the issues of pollution. And I think the problem with water pollution, if you like, you can't see it. People can't see it, and it's not until they have an occurrence where they do get sick from swimming in the river, or indeed drinking the water. Perish the thought. There is a story of someone that we know that actually was trying to convince somebody to come in and swim in the river, and they did. They took a glass of water and drank it, and this is on the River Avon. They were then violently ill for however many days afterwards. But I think if it highlights one thing, then that these rivers are being polluted, then it is fantastic. And perhaps the one of the areas that we have over on the Wiley, this particular hatch pool, if people swim there responsibly, and I think you touched on it earlier, take their litter away with them, then perhaps we can all we should be able to live together, really. But it's just doing things on a sensible level, really. And unfortunately, places that have public access, certain hatch pool on the Avon upstream of where I am here, they had massive issues there with wild swimming, and then people were having parties overnight, and it started to get a bit out of hand, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting debate, and the pollution stuff we're going to come on to a little bit later as well. But I wanted to just circle back on the fishing aspect of it and that later start. And for me, we kick off in mid-March, March 15th. Usually it's cold, wet, miserable, and not great fishing yet. Coming back to fishing, and I did actually catch some fish on the open day before lockdown. And when I came back to the river, it was actually quite nice that it was warm. The fish were rising. And the fishing for me, the trout fishing has been extraordinary. And I can't work out if that is a function of the spring that you talk about. And would it be, I don't think, because where I'm fishing, it's not heavily fished. But do you think fish having a little bit more of a breather to get into a rhythm of feeding and eating at the surface, do you think that played a part in it, a small part, a big part? What do you think?
I think I think angling pressure does have a big effect on fish, on wild trout, and certainly on the I've seen it big time on the Irish locks, and I have an old time friend of mine, guy called Dennis Moss, who lives on Loch Corrib, and it's one of his hobby horses, if you like, that he talks about angling pressure. And certainly Loch Corrib is one thing. I mean, it's 44,000 acres. I lived on Loch Sheelan for 10 years. It's 4,000 acres. So, very much smaller lake. So you could say angling pressure on there potentially was greater. But certainly, yeah, you would see it there. If word went out that it was fishing well, you started to get a lot of boats, a lot of boat activity, and it does affect the fish, and you see it on the rivers as well. That we try and have on all our rivers, we try and have a non-fishing bank, so we don't have double bank fishing. We may own or lease both banks, but we always try and have a wilder bank. But you do see it that the fish can get pushed to the far bank, and increasingly now with our habitat work, we are leaving stuff on the fishing bank as well. Whereas historically the fishing bank used to be very much it was access all areas, if you like, but we are finding by leaving some habitat or more habitat on the fishing bank that you get fish lying on both sides of the river. But certainly, yeah, angling pressure has a big effect, I think, on fish behavior. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You talked about habitat and stuff, and I think that's an interesting subject in itself. And with chalk streams being man-made, historically, and I may be wrong here, so please correct me if I am, but it always felt to me as though rivers, and I don't bunch chalk streams in, I suppose I do with all rivers, but, were managed really more for the angler. But to me, it seems in recent times that you're actually seeing people like yourself and other river keepers I know thinking that it's the habitat for the fish that comes first now. Would I be right in saying that you're concentrating more on that rather than cutting anything out the way that makes a cast difficult? You're thinking about the environment for the trout and, of course, the grayling to live in.
Absolutely. No, categorically. Certainly the Piscatorial Society always had a history of trying to do things that was good for the fish. But over the last you could say over the last 20 years, we've focused more and more on what's good for the fish. And okay, we have to look at what's good for the angler and ease of access for the angler as well. But we try and manage all our fisheries, so we have a whole host of habitats. We've got a good few members that are in their 80s, so we have to cater for those guys and girls and make things in places accessible and easier for them. But equally, we have 20 miles of chalk stream across Wiltshire and Hampshire, and we can afford to have areas that are bordering on what wild. Yeah, absolutely. So and we have seen that more habitat, more trees in the river, woody material, overhanging margins and fringes. Yeah, absolutely, makes a hell of a difference with fish numbers. So we are increasingly looking at that area. And yes, we do some pruning back, and we lift the canopy of a tree if the casting is perhaps a little difficult, but it's certainly nothing like it used to be. And certainly, there was a history on these chalk streams of putting the river to bed in the autumn, where you'd cut out the margin and you'd edge up the bank, you'd take the silt out, and you de-silt the margins. We don't do any of that now, and we leave the old margins throughout the winter. It's important. There are important areas for insects and for for instance, water voles as well. We've seen this steep decline in water voles. Well, it's probably no wonder, because people are cutting out their margins in the winter, and voles just don't like that. They don't feel comfortable without that cover. So we are increasing. Well, I say increasingly. Yeah, we look at the whole. Ecology of the river. Fish. Obviously, if the ecology is good, then the fish will thrive, and so will everything else that's living on the water. But it is important that we do cater for all comers when it comes to the fishing. And interestingly, this year on the Avon, we couldn't cut weed on the main Avon there because of the issues with COVID. The EA couldn't install the weed boom, so we didn't cut any weed at all on the Avon. And whilst it did create some issues, it was an interesting season in that we did have members that said, why on earth do you cut weed at all? We love it. It's great fishing the pockets, and we're really enjoying it. Obviously, there were other people that said it made the water unfishable, but it's been an interesting year on that front on the Avon where we haven't cut weed, and you could almost say there was, as a consequence, perhaps more fly life. And certainly there has been a recent study done by somebody called Jessica Marsh, who's involved with the Game and Wildlife Trust, and I think the study was done on the Froome about ranunculus and the importance of ranunculus on salmonids, particularly salmon. And essentially the conclusion is the more ranunculus you have, the more salmon you're going to have in these chalk streams. So I think you need to pay a lot of attention to the habitat. It's very, very important. But there we are. There are still people that will cut out every last blade of weed if they get the chance, and cut trees in an inappropriate manner, and so it goes on. But it's a case of educating and slow education, really, of fisheries managers and anglers for that matter.
Interesting. I was thinking about it while you were talking about that, and it strikes me, I don't know the club, I've not fished the waters, but it strikes me that your approach is modern and progressive about a number of things. Do you find your membership have moved with that as well? And it was interesting where you said some of your members really enjoyed fishing those little pockets, while some may not have done. But do you think, with returning fish, good handling of fish, is that something you sort of help your membership with, to be aware of these practices as well?
Absolutely, yeah. We have every year. Well, apart from this year, of course, with COVID times, we have an early season. We have a chalk stream, a chalk streams tactics day, which is primarily for our new members, and then in the autumn we have a grayling tactics day. We also have various other meetings throughout the year as well. But we have a fly day where people come and various angling gurus, maybe we could call them, come and speak to the membership. And so we try and promote best practice where we can. And and absolutely, interestingly, I think it's a massive, people catch and release now big time. And even we have, as I say, 20 miles of water, 15 of which aren't stocked. So we only stock 5 miles. But even on those 5, we try and encourage people to take the stock fish. But people know they want to catch and release everything. Very, 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 very much, we're very much conservation orientated, and we are getting now. We've got a good few members in their 80s, but we are getting guys now that are joining and they're in their 30s, and they appreciate, those younger guys appreciate all the the woody material and the rewilding, as some of our older members call the habitat work. I mean, we're far from rewilding, really. It's not wholesale rewilding at all. It'd be nice to be able to do that, but obviously we can't. But yeah, absolutely, it's a case of bringing the membership. I say the membership have to be on board, because without members, we haven't got a club, basically. So, but it is a slow process, and it's certainly a journey, definitely, that I think we're all on. Yeah.
Really interesting. We're going to head over to Loch Sheelin in a minute, but there's one thing I want to touch on first is grayling, and how even, that amazing, wonderful turnaround in seeing them, as particularly on, I guess, on chalk streams, as not an inconvenience, but they weren't seen in the same way as trout. And dear Ron Holloway, who I knew, a wonderful man who I miss greatly, told me a story when, before these sorts of times when grayling is so much more revered, that he was working with Frank Sawyer on the Avon, and they had to take all the grayling out, throw them in a trench, they're dug, and cover them over. And it's been wonderful to see how they've been embraced in a relatively short period of time, actually, isn't it? Now, I'm talking whatever it is, 10, 15 years, but it's been an amazing turnaround. And I see so many people now say that they're their favorite fish and love fishing for them. It's really encouraging to see that, isn't it?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And they are, and there's no doubt when you catch a grayling, it's a wild fish. In fact, interestingly, mentioning Ron Holloway, I worked with Ron Holloway going back 40 years. In fact, my early days of working on the chalk streams on the Itchen with Ron, and of course back then there were no grayling in the upper Itchen. So I think I first worked with Ron maybe in 79 or 80. And at that point, above Winchester, there were no grayling. And then I don't know whoever made the decision. I think they stopped grayling up in Alsford Pond. I think the EA transported some up there, and now they're right the way through the upper Itchen, and some mighty fine grayling there are up there. But certainly going back, I started with the Society 21 years ago, and back then we had a neighbour that still insisted on taking the grayling out, electrofishing them out. We used to do the electrofishing for them, and we basically encouraged the guy not to compost them as they were. And we were moving, or the fish were being moved live to other areas. But we then eventually encouraged the guy to stop completely, and we have actually found, I think, as a consequence, the population dynamic has changed as a consequence, and it's stabilized. But yeah, they're fantastic fish, and it is a way of extending the season. We fish through until the 31st of December, and they are. I mean, historically, they were seen as a well. In fact, the word that was used historically, they were looked on as vermin, and so they were basically, people it was futile to try and eradicate the fish. It just messed with the population dynamic and biomass. But they certainly add to the fishing season. And of course, the more you take out, the more small fish you're going to end up with. But we're now seeing some fantastic, and that in those 20 years, we're now seeing bigger grayling, certainly on the Avon than we saw historically, which is nice.
I've got a confession. I fished Marta Worthy, which was Ron's section. It must be 18, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I got it in the Wild Trout Trust auction. And that's when you could afford it and you could turn up. And there's another story about my friend and I turning up in jeans and T-shirt, and the club it was in would only let jackets. So they made us wear these ridiculous jackets so that we fitted in. But we got a day on there, and it was funny that Ron said, even then, I'm really sorry, but we've got to tap any grayling that we caught. And my confession is I caught some and I put them back. I couldn't do it. They were so beautiful. And I couldn't do it. My buddy Ray was exactly the same, and we caught. So we were worried Ron was in the bushes watching us, but we just couldn't do it. And we put those fish back, and I'm pleased we did. But let's move on to Ireland then. So Loch Sheelin, you ran a lodge on there for 10 years, I think you said.
Yeah.
How was that? And that must have been a fascinating, interesting job. What did that job entail as running a lodge?
Gosh, well, I have to say, it was an amazing time. 10 probably, 10 amazing years. Some of the best years I'd say of my life, fishing, and both fishing and friendship. Met some amazing people over in Ireland, and we're still in touch with a lot of those people. Basically we I don't know whether you know any of the history of Sheelin. We've sort of touched on pollution and water quality. Sheelin always had a history of producing bigger than average wild brown trout. There's a lovely little bit in the opening section of Brian Clark's Pursuit of a Stillwater Trout. I think it was one of the first places that Brian caught a wild brown trout, and back then it always produced bigger than average wild brown trout. But in the I think in the 1970s, maybe, the area became, and in fact, I don't think it is anymore, but at one point it was the biggest, one of the biggest pork or pig producing areas in Europe. And so they had this sea of slurry to dispose of, and it wasn't always disposed of in a particularly environmentally friendly manner. And so Sheelin did become sort of grossly enriched at one point. There were massive algal blooms, and the fish and mayfly suffered as a consequence. And in fact, when we arrived in 89, the mayfly had gone, essentially. And then they came back. I saw one maybe in 89, a dozen in 90, 91 there were a few more, and then 92 there was just this massive explosion. Those dates, give or take a year or so. But and so we we were actually, when we went over there to set up this fishing lodge, I mean, some of the locals actually laughed at us that we were trying to set up this trout fishing, fly fishing lodge on a lake that was grossly polluted. And I said at the time, well, actually, okay. I fell in love with the place immediately, and with the fish, the people, and the area. And people said, were we crazy? The lake was polluted. There were algal blooms and what have you. And I said, well, look, I've fished on reservoirs in the UK where we have algal blooms, and it's not necessarily something that's going to stop me fishing. It's just encouraging other people to come and experience it as well. And the lake really did go through a bit of a roller coaster during those 10 years that we were there. And so there were periods where you would have, reasonable water clarity, should I say, because you always had, high phosphate loadings, and it was just a set of circumstances that would encourage the algal blooms. So there were challenges on that front to sort of get people to come and fish the lake. But basically, we set up a lodge, and we had anglers come primarily from the UK, but we would cater for anglers from, we had people from Germany, America, France, and also from the Republic of Ireland, from Northern Ireland, from England, Scotland, and over those 10 years we had all comers, and we basically catered for every aspect of their fishing holiday. So from breakfast, packed lunch, evening meal. I used to guide. We had a fleet of boats and a team of gillies that worked with us. And we had amazing times. The fishing was really tough. Could be very tough, but a 4 pound wild brown trout on Loch Sheelin is sniffed at. If back then, in the late 80s, early 90s, most fish that were caught on the lake were killed. So if you came into a public boat quay with a 4 pound fish, people wouldn't look at it. They wouldn't give it the time of day. It was only if you caught a fish of over 8 or 9 pounds, people would have a look at it and say, nice fish. So we found that if during a week or a weekend where we had a group of anglers, if one of them caught a 4 pound fish, that was all it took to get people to come back. Because, where do you go in the world to catch 4 pound wild brown trout on dry fly? Okay, you may travel to New Zealand or wherever, but indigenous wild brown trout of that size, they're a very rare commodity. So as much as it was challenging trying to get people to come to a lake that was perceived to be polluted, and people would local people would tell you it was finished and it was dying, etc., it was challenging, but we did get people come, and we had a successful business, and we had during the mayfly times and the prime fishing times, we had full occupancy, and it was very, very, very challenging, but very, very rewarding. And interestingly, we left in '99 to come. I had the opportunity to come and work for the Piscatorial Society on the chalk streams, which was something that I'd always wanted to do back to my days spent with Ron Holloway and my time at Sparsholt studying fisheries management. It was always a dream to work on a chalk stream. So the Piscatorial Society job came up and I kind of jumped at it. But at about that time in the late 90s and early 2000s, zebra mussels got into, I think they were in Loch Derg first. Loch Derg is part of the Shannon system, as is Loch Sheelin. And basically, they're a filter feeder. They came in, I think, in the bilge water of boats. And to early 2000s, they got into Loch Sheelin, and they have made an incredible difference to the water clarity of Loch Sheelin. They haven't cured the problem excessive slurry spreading in the area. And okay, government legislation, EU legislation has curbed some of the more, I don't know why I'm searching for the right word, but the more, how should we say, underhand ways of getting rid of slurry. But so that sort of malpractice has changed over the years. People are slightly more careful with what they do with their slurry, but even so, the fields still get spread and get lathered with slurry, and so the lake is still enriched, if you like, but the zebra mussels filter feed and do help to reduce the amount, the amount of algae in the lake, and by and large the water clarity is fantastic now. As a consequence, the fish population has increased and come back to something that it was like in the 60s. It's fished very, very well over the last 10 years. Interestingly, though, talking about the fish population and the numbers of fish, back, I think during the 90s, there were probably less fish, but the average size was maybe bigger. And in fact, I think there was one particular mayfly where our customers caught however many fish, and they were averaging 4 pounds. I don't think you would have that now. You're getting a lot more smaller fish that are being caught. But
That's really cool. That's really, really interesting. And as somebody, I'm interested in it from the fishing point of view, obviously, but also your model there, because as somebody who ran a guiding business, you can't really have add-ons in that way, and it makes it an interesting business. And I remember listening to something with Simon Gorsworth when he had his work with his father, that they did a similar sort of thing. So it becomes a really good workable business when you're offering accommodation, you're offering food, you're offering gillies, that whole sort of package. But also, as somebody who has hosted fishing trips, one of the most nerve-wracking moments is when the boats come in at the end of the day, particularly on a saltwater trip, for example, and you're hoping that everyone has had a wonderful time and managing that. And that must have been kind of interesting when the fishing was a little bit more difficult.
Absolutely, yeah. Obviously, as a host, you want everybody to catch a fish. Now, that isn't always going to be the case, but certainly if everybody saw a big fish and saw one caught, then that was almost as good. And people would have encounters, and they would have mad encounters with big wild brown trout like you've never seen before. And that's all it took. It's almost sort of dream type stuff that fish of people's dreams, and just to get a sniff of one of those, to have a look at them. Absolutely. And in actual fact, it's interesting you mentioned Simon. I did. There was a point in my life, probably in my early 20s, when I hooked up. Simon and I think we did the same NAC casting instructors course back in the early 80s. I think we qualified at the same time on the same course. So we were the youngest guys to have done our casting qualification together at that point, doing the NAC, and we did it with his dad. And there was talk at one point that I would maybe go down and work with Simon and his dad down in Devon. It didn't come to pass in the end, but I did go down and stay with them and talk to his dad at length. And so I always had, I was always aware of that kind of operation. But one of the things for us, we supplied the whole package, so we could, supply rods and casting tuition, blah, blah, blah. But one of the key things for us, you could say, was when the fishing was poor and dire. My wife Fiona is cordon bleu cook, and so they would always come home to this amazing meal. And so, however bad the fishing was, they always had fantastic, food in the evening. And so that was something else that helped manage and the fishing could be, I mean, gosh, Loch Sheelin or any of those Irish lochs, they can be, a cruel master. And you can fish those lochs for a couple of days and not see a fish, not rise a fish. And you would doubt whether there were any fish in there. But so yeah, that was a fantastic aspect of our business. And so people would come in, they'd have a fantastic meal. We had a pub. Our premises was in the village of Finney, which is on the River Inny that flows out of Loch Sheelin. So, and the boat quay was in the village, and between us and the boat quay there was a wonderful pub. And so, guys, if nothing else, then the Guinness would flow, and they could eat some good food and enjoy some good Irish hospitality and crack. And it didn't matter whether they didn't catch a fish, but certainly if one of them had, then that one fish could be the toast of the weekend, if you like. Incredible times, really.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. Fascinating model. And, as I said, having listened to Simon's one, I know his father got a chef down from London, I think, to cook. So that bit, like you say, if you're on your own, it's hard. If it's a tough day, you haven't got that to build people's hopes back up again, and where they're meeting the other anglers at dinner or a drink beforehand and all that sort of stuff. So my hat is off to you for that. I think it's a fabulous idea, and it sounds a fascinating one as well. So let's take you back to the chalk stream. We were talking off mic. We talked about fly tying a little bit, and you said that you've been tying since you were 13, almost 50 years now. And you've seen some changes in fly tying. How do you think that's changed? Is it materials? What are the changes you've seen?
Well, what I would say is I've seen a change in materials, a change in tools. I was very lucky. I grew up in North London, and so and my father didn't fish, my dad didn't fish, so my fly fishing opportunities, you might imagine, in London were limited. But to stay connected, if you like, and keep my passion alive, I started tying flies at 13, and I was very lucky to have met a guy called Ray Jenkins, who we met. Actually, we stayed at the Featherstone Arms on the River Eden in Kirkoswald, which back then was a sort of fishing hotel. And I met this guy called Ray Jenkins, and in fact, Ray was an amazing character. He actually lived in Mill. Grew up in Finchley, and he lived in Mill Hill, which was a couple of miles away in London. And I used to cycle over to his house. And he actually taught me to tie flies without a vice. So he tied in his fingers. And that's kind of my party trick now. I can still just about do that. So, hey, I did have a very basic Vineyards vice back then in the Vineyards kit. So that's changed. Interestingly, Ray worked for the BBC. He was a musical conductor, and he, if you Google him, he was on Desert Island Discs, and I think he was on with Ray Plumley maybe. And if you go on the Desert Island Discs archive, I would say he's the only person whose book was Skew's book, or Skew's book. I think it was what was this? I can't remember what the way of the, was it the way of a nymph or whatever? So that was his book, and then his luxury item was fly tying equipment. Although obviously without a vice, because he didn't use a vice. But yeah, so back to improvements. Yeah, vices now. I mean, I'm just blown away by some of the prices of fly tying vices. Unbelievable. And we've got a couple of young guys that work, that fish, that are members of the Piscatorial Society. Very young guys. We've done some fly tying together, and they've got these. What are they? Walden vice.
Waldron, wow, yeah.
And I mean, they're just amazing, absolutely amazing, but mind-blowingly expensive. So vices. And when I first started tying, I didn't have a bobbin holder, so you'd pull off 12 inches of thread, you'd wax it up, and you would tying by hand using your fingers as the vice. With that process, you would always do a half hitch at the end of each process, so you could put the hook down and then get your next bit of material. But obviously, the advent of a bobbin holder, fantastic. And now I have to say, I'm not the full, tackle tart. I'm not the full fly tying equipment tart, but I have to say, hey, I love the Petitjean bobbin holder. Threading it is an absolute dream. Having the little clamp on it so you can adjust the tension, absolutely wonderful. Made with beautiful material, superb. This is made a nice plug for Mark Petitjean, but hey. I hope he appreciates it. But Mark, the Petitjean whip finish tool, I always whip finished by hand, back in the day, and I had various whip finish tools over the years. I could never get on with them. The Petitjean whip finish tool is a complete dream, an absolute dream to use. So those things, those subtle things that have helped my tying. The advent of, I love I use barbless hooks now all the time, and much to how should we say, much to the horror of some of my Irish fishing friends, that I use barbless on the locks over there, and boy, some of those. Certainly I'm a great TMCO hook fan. Some of those TMCO barbless hooks, if you've hooked a fish with those, they're not coming off. And as I say to my Irish friends, you lose fish with barbed hooks. So historically, with those big wild brown trout, they've got various really hard bits in their mouth, and you might not penetrate those, and you're going to lose them with a barbed hook hooks. The advance in hooks, materials wise, I'm still quite trad on the material front. I mean, I love tying wet flies with the Dabbler series with bronze mallard. But I have to say, I tie a particular spent that I use on the rivers here and on Sheelin as well, using aero wing. A flat spent with aero wing, aero wing's fantastic material, and a great post material for clink hammers. I would say there are. Gosh, I'm kind of conservative in a way, in that I'm not way on out there with new materials, but subtle bits here and there, and I do like to experiment, and I do like to try new things. But by and large, some of the, for instance, some of the dubbings now, the dry fly dubbings, they're a hell of a lot easier to manipulate and use in your fingers anyway. And I do a bit of a little bit of fly tying tuition and getting people to dub seals fur. Gosh, that's agonizing to watch. What am I doing wrong? It's yeah. So using modern dubbing is an advancement.
Where do you stand, Stuart, on, because to me, I think, and it's aligned with the popular or the rise in popularity of grayling, to me, tungsten beads have been a game changer for subsurface fishing. Do you feel the same on that front?
Do you know, it was on the tip of my tongue to mention beads. I was going to make in that, that list of things that I said I was going to mention, but absolutely categorically. And for me, it's not all about about big beads. I'm tying a lot of nymphs on size 20s and 18s, tying up the Mary pattern, pheasant tail with the flashback and what have you, and fishing that on a 20 hook with a tiny bead. Now, absolutely fantastic. And not only are they beads great for getting your fly down, I think they're invaluable for sight fishing. To actually key into. I mean, I think we're kind of, to a degree, we're losing sight fishing. We've had a whole thing going on within the club this year with whether it's correct or not to use indicators during the trout season. Now, obviously, if you're using an indicator, you're not sight fishing. You're not looking at, as Sawyer did, as Skews did. I think Skews talked about the wink, the underwater wink. Well, if you're using an indicator, you're not looking for that wink at all. But that's the ultimate in chalk stream nymph fishing, is seeing that fish move to the side, come up in the water, open his mouth. And obviously, if you can see your fly and having a little, silver bead or gold bead or whatever can actually aid that. Now, there may be chalk stream anglers out there that might obviously not like the idea that I find beads an aid to sight fishing, but hey, I didn't have these 30 years ago, so they are any aid I can get. But as far as the indicators, I think indicators during the during the autumn for grayling fishing, can be a great aid. But certainly during the season where you've got lovely clear water and you're sight fishing for fish, beads are wonderful. And they do. I mean, years ago when we were weighting flies, we would use copper wire. And I think I'm not sure. I think with the Walker's nymph, the mayfly nymph, I think he used the lead from wine, the wine bottle topped. Well, obviously now we've got screw lids, so you can't use your lead from your wine bottle. But that was always very clunky, a very clunky way of weighting your fly. So, but yeah, beads are great, and now with the array of colours as well that you can get, they are a fantastic addition, although I do find it challenging sometimes to thread the smaller ones.
Yeah, tell me about. I'm just hanging on there now with that, and I could just about do it. It's a massive result when I do. So I carry a spare pair of glasses just in case, but just hanging in there.
Yeah. But but certainly if anybody's out there that can tell me, you have them in the palm of your hand, threading the small beads on. Yeah, no, I find that a challenge on occasions. But there might be someone out there there may be a gadget out there.
You've got the CNF thing, haven't you? The threader thing.
Which
that might do the job. And they do it for small flies as well. I kept breaking them, but
okay.
I break most things, but that might be worth trying.
But the CNF thing for threading the bead on?
Oh no, not threading the bead. No. I see exactly what you mean now. Yeah,
No, it's
yeah,
actually
no,
putting the
absolutely.
bead on, onto the hook.
Yes.
Although, could you use that? That's interesting.
What I do is jab the bead into my finger
Yeah,
so that it can't move,
yeah,
and then take the fly so that the point of the fly goes towards my finger and
yeah.
it doesn't move around too much. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but perhaps that might help a little bit. But I wanted to move on because we've been chatting over an hour now, can you believe? And I wanted to, before we start winding up, I wanted to ask you, I thought, and we've alluded to it, and I want to talk about the P word, pollution. It's getting a lot in the press. We're trying our own little way to highlight it as much as we possibly can. How do you see that playing out? Do you think this movement is growing bigger and bigger and louder?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. I very much hope so. Um, you look at the just generally you look at hey, look, we've got Greta now talking about environmental destruction, and you've got, and love it or loathe it, I know people out there would say that they're a bunch of whatevers, but you've got XR there, and groups of people that are passionate about the environment, and about where we're heading in this world, this life. And what I would say is, I as I've said earlier, I went to Loch Sheelin back in 1989. That's an amazing trout fishery, and yet it was ravaged by industrial scale farming and farming malpractice. And yes, there was an element of certain sewage works being out of date with no phosphate strippers, and so that all fed into the issue. But what I'm going to say is that was in '89 that I became aware, and I became involved with the local club there and an environmental group there, and we did some work and campaigning, and the Loch Sheelin Trout Protection Association, they still campaign to this day, and I'm very proud to have been associated with that when I was there. But what I would say is 1989, that was happening in Ireland, and that fantastic trout fishery had been devastated by pollution, by excess nutrients. And if you told me then that our chalk streams 20 or 30 years on would be facing similar issues, I would have said, I don't believe you. I cannot believe that. I cannot believe. But that is where you could say that is where we're heading. Some people would say that is where we are now. I don't honestly think that we are, quite where Loch Sheelin was back in the 1980s, but there are issues. Yes, we have issues with pollution. We have where I live here. I live right on the River Avon, just south of downstream of Amesbury. If anybody that knows the 303, and is up and down to London on the 303, all you got to do is look at Solstice Park. Solstice Park wasn't there 20 years ago. Massive area of tarmac now, of however half a dozen drive-through fast food joints, a hotel, a big warehouse, or big warehouses. That wasn't there 20 years ago. There are more houses now in Amesbury than there were. There's the new housing development at Lark Hill that is for, I think, the repatriation of some of the British Army from Germany. I think all those pressures, and yet the water company, and I would say there are good people within the water company with it. We're involved with Wessex Water at the moment. They're doing some sampling work. There are ecologists there that work for Wessex Water, passionate people about the environment. They have passion about the environment. But you could say Amesbury sewage works. There were two sewage works, Ratfin and West Amesbury. To my knowledge, they haven't grown with those developments, and I think they need to be bigger than they were. I mean, I was aware going back 15 years ago, I had concerns about West Amesbury sewage works. I raised it with the Environment Agency, with various people locally. But I was told they, within the parameters of their discharge license, in times of high flow, they can just let sewage go wholesale. And obviously, the bigger the population, the more houses there are, the more industry there is, then that sewage works, that West Amesbury is going to be under pressure. And I would say increasing, and I know Fergal has said, I've heard Fergal speaking about the numbers of times that there are these discharge events, and it's horrific, really, in this day and age, that raw sewage is being basically discharged into any watercourse, but let alone these iconic, whether you call them, iconic fisheries, or I mean, they're just fantastic systems, and whether that perhaps we shouldn't focus on it being a fishery. It's just an ecological marvel, or they're ecological marvels. I think historically, did someone compare, what did they compare them to? I can't remember. They compared them to what did they say, the rainforests, or
yes, absolutely.
They're fragile ecosystems that need to be preserved. And I'm absolutely, I actually agree with that. But actually, do you know what? As anglers, we can do our bit. And so, if they are these wonderful marvels, then we can do our bit to preserve them. And and we're back to the habitat work. We don't want double bank fishing. We don't want the grass mown to the last. Do we? There's a question of, do we actually stop them with inappropriately sized trout? All those things. Really, we should as anglers, we should be looking at what we're doing to the environment as well. It's very easy to blame everybody else for what's going on in the world, but I think we can all do our little bit. But it is certainly worrying, and I was talking to Nick Measham of Salmon and Trout Conservation there just recently, and we were talking about pollution and about invertebrates, and Nick said to me, that's all well and good, Stuart, but you got to think about 50 years time, and we've got to think about the future, and you could argue that at least we are doing that now, whereas back when, in fact, there we are, dear old Ron, bless him, back in the day, back 30-40 years ago, he was talking about catchment management. He was talking about the fish farms on the Upper Itchen polluting the river. He was talking about it. But I think we need to do all we can, really, to preserve them, and in any way we can, and if that is cutting the grass one time less, so you've got habitat there for the invertebrates, you're letting your margins grow a bit longer. If we can do all that and that helps, then fantastic.
Good points. points. Yeah. What else I'll throw into that as well, if anyone's listening, you're seeing pollution, film it, contact the EA, contact your MP, and just keep on at them as well. Don't give up. I think it's really, really important to engage them and make them aware that the voice, as I said at the beginning, is getting a little bit louder now as well. And I think we can all contribute in that way if we see it. I want to end now with a question.
Okay.
It sounds to me as though you fished in lots of places. You've done some amazing things. Where is your dream destination? Where's that one place you'd really like to go to?
Where I'd really like to go to, all right, well,
you can return.
Sorry?
You can return there if you wish.
Okay.
If you've been there once before.
Well, basically, there we are in COVID times as we are. Who knows where we're heading with this? But I have to say, it was with a heavy heart that I couldn't go on my annual trip or annual couple of trips to Loch Sheelin this year. So I didn't travel to Ireland this year for the first time. I didn't set foot in Ireland for the first time in 31 years this year. So yeah, I dream about Loch Sheelin. Maybe it's a bit unhealthy, but I dream about Loch Sheelin. And regardless of COVID, I love going back there. It's a wonderful place. It's wonderful fishing. So that would be my dream destination. I have thought about, as everybody does, think about going to other places, to Iceland and New Zealand and all those places. But hey, if we're thinking about our carbon footprint, I've got to go to Ireland, and maybe I've got to go on the ferry. These days, not go or even swim over there, but not not go on the aeroplane for however many hours. So yeah, quite dull really. But I'm maybe a bit like Ray Jenkins, my desert. I don't know what my desert island book would be, but my dream fishing destination is Loch Sheelin. But what time of year, I don't know. The mayfly can be fantastic. You get fantastic murra fishing, green peter fishing. You get the phenomena of the bloodworm migration, and then the back end, pulling wets in a big wave in September and October. Any of those times, but I just love to be able to go back there, and hopefully, as they say in Ireland, God willing, I'll be able to go back there next season. Absolutely. That is my dream destination.
Fantastic.
And I'd say anybody out there that hasn't been there, go and experience it. Experience it in all its glory. Even spending a day without catching a fish.
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. Stuart, that's a lovely way. It's brought us round full circle, and we've covered so much, and you've done so much. And I'd just love to say thank you so much for being such a really fascinating guest today. It's been brilliant to have you along.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and well, thank you for inviting me. And what I'd say is keep up the good work with the magazine. The magazine's amazing, absolutely amazing. It is seriously, it's fantastic. It's in every aspect, the quality of the paper, the whole lot. It's an amazing magazine. Years ago, there was a magazine called International Fly Fisher. I don't know whether you ever came across it. It had a very short-lived life. I just hope that the magazine goes from strength to strength, and because it's absolutely wonderful.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Thank you so much for being a guest today.
Okay, a pleasure. Cheerio.
Thanks very much indeed. Thanks everyone for listening to the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as I have. There are lots more in the pipeline, so tune in very, very soon. But thanks for listening.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.